The moment her fingers brushed the wrong place, the fate of two civilizations shifted. No alarms blared. No guards moved. But every being in the throne chamber felt it, like the vacuum of space suddenly leaning closer to listen. Ambassador Kael Riven had been trained to negotiate trade corridors, not survive alien courtship rituals. Yet here he stood beneath a dome of crystal starlight, while the blind ruler of the Auralith Dominion reached for him, and missed. She was called Empress Nyxara, though no one alive knew her real age. Her eyes had been veiled since birth, not because she was fragile, but because her species did not rule by sight. They ruled by resonance, by feeling the emotional gravity of those around them. Kael had read the files. Every human diplomat had. Never flinch. Never initiate contact. Never break the cadence of silence. And yet, as Nyxara's gloved hand drifted forward through the cool ion mist of the throne hall, Kael felt something no protocol had prepared him for. Anticipation. Her fingers passed his shoulder, missed his insignia, then slid lower, brushing the metal clasp at his hip, the housing of his translator core. The chamber inhaled as one. Hundreds of alien nobles, beings of vapor, bone, liquid crystal, froze in unison. Their Emperor Queen had just touched a foreigner in the proximity rite, a sacred ritual reserved only for those being evaluated as potential sovereign mates. Kael didn't move. Couldn't, because Nyxara stilled, her head tilting slightly, veil shimmering like moonlight through frost. Her voice emerged as a whisper amplified through the throne hall's resonance field. Your core is not what I expected, human envoy. A chill crept up Kael's spine. This was not a mistake. This was curiosity. And in the Auralith Dominion, curiosity from the throne was more dangerous than war. Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. Now back to Kael, who was very aware that half the galaxy was watching him become something he had never volunteered to be. He swallowed slowly. Your Radiance, I am Ambassador Kael Riven of the Terran Coalition. My core is merely a linguistic interface. Nyxara's fingers tightened, not possessively, but analytically. Her touch was precise, calibrated, as though she were reading him like a living instrument. The nobles began murmuring in harmonic undertones. Some sounded alarmed, others impressed. Across the hall, the high attendant, an arthropoid creature with jeweled mandibles, clicked its limbs sharply against the floor in warning cadence. Your Radiance, it intoned. The proximity rite has not been invoked. Nyxara did not withdraw her hand. Instead, she leaned forward, the silver spines of her ceremonial crown catching the star lamps overhead. It has now, she replied. Silence detonated through the chamber. Kael's heart thudded so loudly, he was sure the resonance field carried it to every listening noble. His training screamed at him to disengage, to retreat, to apologize. But something in Nyxara's posture told him that doing so would be catastrophic. Her fingers drifted upward, lightly brushing the collar of his diplomatic jacket, where the coalition emblem glowed faintly blue. Your kind hides behind optics, she said softly. Screens, lenses, walls of light, but you do not hide your pulse well. Kael forced himself to breathe evenly. Micro cliffhanger. If he panicked now, would this become an insult or a proposal? The high attendant scuttled closer. Your Radiance, human physiology is loud, Nyxara finished. Yes, gloriously loud. Her head tilted again, veil shimmering. She was smiling. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. In the HFY Sci-Fi Tales Kael had grown up reading, humanity always arrived with firepower or miracle technology. Not this time. This time, humanity had arrived with a heartbeat the Empress of a blind empire found irresistible. And the nobles were beginning to realize what Kael had not yet fully grasped. The proximity rite did not test loyalty. It tested compatibility. Nyxara released him at last, her fingers trailing away like static discharge. The echo of her touch lingered on his skin long after contact ended. You will remain in the palace, she declared. Not as envoy. The high attendant stiffened. Your Radiance, the Terran Coalition will protest. Let them, Nyxara said. Her voice softened. but the chamber vibrated with finality. I must feel him again. Every being in the throne hall turned toward Kael, and in that moment, he understood something horrifying. He had not been summoned to negotiate. He had been summoned to be chosen. By dawn cycle, the human envoy was no longer a guest. He was a variable in an ancient equation no one alive knew how to solve. Kael Riven stood inside a chamber that did not exist on any star map. It was not a cell, not a suite, not a diplomatic holding room. It was an auditory sanctum, a place where the Auralith Empress processed the emotional signatures of those she deemed relevant. The walls pulsed faintly, not with light, but with soundless vibration, as if the room itself were breathing with him. Outside the translucent barrier, guards of crystal sinew and flowing energy waited in ritual silence. None met his eyes. None spoke. That alone terrified him more than chains. 3 hours ago, he had been briefing the Coalition's legal counsel on minor tariff adjustments. Now he was being prepared for a resonant assessment, a ceremony so rarely invoked that even his AI advisors had redacted the consequences. The door opened without a sound. Nyxara entered alone. She wore no armor this time, no crown of silver thorns, only a pale veil over her eyes and a robe that shimmered like condensed moonlight. She moved slowly, counting invisible distances with the tips of her fingers, gliding along the vibrating walls. Kael's breath hitched. He told himself to remain calm. He told himself this was a misunderstanding, but the room's resonance shifted, responding to his pulse like a predator leaning closer. "You are loud today," Nyxara said gently. That single sentence undid him. How could she hear fear through silence? "I am under considerable stress," Kael replied, choosing every word with surgical care. "Your radiance, my presence here, was not authorized by my government." She stopped a meter away from him, close enough that he could smell something cold and clean in the air, like starlight after storm. "Your government authorized your arrival," she said. "It did not authorize your impact." Her hand lifted, hesitating midair. Kael realized with a spike of dread that she was not reaching blindly this time. She was calibrating. The room hummed. The floor vibrated faintly beneath his boots. He felt the translator core at his hip flare warm, struggling to parse a frequency that was not sound, not electromagnetic radiation, but something closer to emotional pressure. Her fingertips brushed his wrist, and the chamber exploded with resonance. Kael gasped as invisible force rippled outward. Not violent, not painful, intimate. The walls responded with harmonic waves, mapping his nervous system, tracing his stress, his memories, his grief. Nyxara recoiled slightly, as if shocked. "Stars," she whispered. The high attendant's voice crackled through a hidden conduit. "Your radiance, the reading is unstable. His emotional lattice is immense," Nyxara said, breathless. Kael's vision blurred. For a terrifying second, he thought he was about to lose consciousness. But then the pressure eased, leaving him hollowed out, like someone had opened a door inside his chest. She stepped back slowly. "You carry so much," she said, "for a species that has not ruled a single spiral arm." He swallowed. "We survive by carrying what we must." Was that admiration in her tone? The door behind her sealed. The guards withdrew. They were alone. Nyxara moved again, slower now, more careful, as if he were made of something that could fracture under the wrong frequency. "When I touched your core before," she said, "I mistook machinery for essence. That has never happened to me." Her fingers hovered near his heart. Kael's pulse thundered. "Your radiance," he said quietly. "I am not a candidate for whatever you think I am." Her hand stopped, suspended a breath away from his chest. "In our legends," she replied, "the founding empress chose a star-born exile because he resonated where none else did. He was not noble. He was not prepared. He was different." The air thickened. "Do you know what happened to him?" she asked. Kael shook his head. "He became my people's first king." Silence. Outside this hidden sanctum, fleets shifted orbit. Treaties waited in data queues. Entire civilizations continued their daily cycles, unaware that a blind Star-Empress was seconds away from changing history with a single touch. Nyxara leaned closer. You are not here because of your credentials, Kael Riven, she said softly. You are here because when I reach for the dark, it answers with you. Her fingers pressed lightly against his sternum, and the resonance surged, stronger, deeper, no longer merely reading him. It was responding. The instant her fingers settled against Kael's chest, the sanctum's vibration deepened into something almost musical. It was not sound. It was structure, an invisible geometry pressing through him, mapping every hidden fracture in his soul. He staggered, breath hitching, and she caught him without seeing. Her grip was steady, practiced, as though she had held collapsing stars this way before. You are unraveling, Nyxara murmured. Kael braced himself on the edge of a crystalline console that shimmered into existence beside him, the room responding to his need for support. You're inside my head, he said. That isn't permitted under any interstellar charter. I am not inside, she replied. I am listening. Her hand slid from his sternum to his shoulder, then to the side of his neck, stopping just short of the carotid pulse that thundered there. The resonance spiked again, and Kael's thoughts blurred with memories he had spent years burying. A training hall on Luna, a failed rescue on the asteroid colony Hestia 9, the moment he had signed the diplomatic corps contract, because it was easier than grieving. He clenched his fists. Stop, she did. The room softened, as if exhaling. I did not intend to wound you, Nyxara said quietly, but your kind holds sorrow like a weapon, hidden until it detonates. He stared at her veil, at the faint luminescence behind the pale fabric. We don't get to choose what we carry. She considered this, her head tilting the slightest degree. Neither do I. For a while neither spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It was watchful. A low chime rippled through the walls. Somewhere beyond the sanctum, a quorum had been convened. Kael felt it in the way the vibration sharpened, tightening like a net around them both. They're gathering, he said. Yes, Nyxara replied. They are afraid. Of me, of what you awaken. She turned away from him, walking a slow circle around the chamber, fingers trailing along the resonant walls. Each touch sent delicate ripples through the air, like sonar mapping an abyss. When I was born, she said, my eyes were sealed because sight would have overwhelmed me. Our species senses the emotional gravity of others. Too much input shatters the young. I learned to rule by what I could feel, not what I could see. Kael followed her movement, every instinct screaming that this was far beyond his pay grade. So what am I to you? An anomaly? A threat? She stopped directly in front of him. You are a storm contained in flesh, she said. Your people have not yet learned how dangerous that makes you. The door behind them vibrated. The high attendant's voice filtered through the sanctum, clipped and formal. Your radiance, the noble circles request clarification. The resonant field has registered unprecedented amplitude. Nyxara did not respond immediately. Instead, she lifted her veil, just enough for Kael to glimpse the faint glow beneath. He did not see eyes. He saw something like a horizon just before dawn. You may enter, she said at last. The barrier dissolved. A procession of Auralith nobles streamed in, each radiating their own harmonic signature. Some pulsed sharp and brittle with fear. Others shimmered with restrained awe. They arranged themselves in a half-circle around Kael, giving him the unmistakable sensation of being appraised from the inside out. The high attendant stepped forward. Your radiance, this human is destabilizing the throne resonance. The proximity right cannot continue. Nyxara lifted a single finger. The room fell instantly silent. He is not destabilizing it, she said. He is amplifying it. A murmur swept the nobles. Kael cleared his throat, acutely aware that he had just become the subject of a debate that could rewrite interstellar law. I didn't come here to cause unrest, he said. I came to negotiate passage rights through the Helia Rift. Nyxara turned back to him. You came here because your species has learned to survive without resonance. You have mastered dissonance. That is why you endure where others fracture. The high attendant clicked its mandibles. Your radiance, the Founder's Codex forbids. The Codex was written by those who feared change, Nyxara replied. I was crowned to transcend it. She extended her hand toward Kael again, but this time she did not touch him. She waited. Every noble in the chamber leaned forward. Kael hesitated only a moment before placing his own hand into hers. The resonance did not surge. It harmonized, and across the Dominion, every resonant tower flared in unison, broadcasting a signal that had not been heard in 10,000 cycles. The sound of a new monarch being chosen. When the resonant towers ignited across the Dominion, Kael felt it before anyone spoke. The sanctum's walls tightened their harmonic field until even his bones seemed to hum in sympathy. Every noble in the chamber recoiled as if struck by invisible lightning, except Nyxara, who stood perfectly still with his hand in hers. The High Attendant broke first. Your Radiance, the towers have entered sovereign broadcast. That frequency is restricted to coronations. I am aware, Nyxara said calmly. Kael tried to pull his hand back. He failed, not because she held him, but because the room itself resisted, the resonance knitting their pulses together with terrifying intimacy. This is a mistake, he whispered. My people will never accept. They will, Nyxara replied, because they will feel it. She released him at last, and the pressure eased, just enough for him to breathe. But the damage was done. Across 1,000 systems, blind listeners were lifting their veils, hearing through vibration what sight could never reveal. A noble of crystalline vapor drifted forward. Your Radiance, if this human has triggered the ascendant pattern, he must undergo the trial of echoes. Kael turned sharply. The what? Nyxara did not look at the noble. Her attention was fixed on Kael. It is how my people determine whether resonance is truth or deception. And if I fail? A pause. A fraction too long. Then the towers will devour your signal, the vapor noble said. Your emotional lattice will collapse. You will not survive. Kael stared at Nyxara, searching her veiled face for some hint of mercy. He found resolve instead. You said I amplify your throne, he said. Then let me leave before I destroy it. Nyxara stepped closer. I have ruled for 120 cycles, without sight. I have never been wrong about a soul. Do not insult me by doubting now. The High Attendant folded its limbs in rigid displeasure. The trial of echoes requires isolation within the resonance labyrinth. No foreign organism has ever entered it and lived. Then history will have a new footnote, Nyxara replied. Kael's calm implant vibrated against his skull, finally punching through the sanctum's isolation field. A holographic glyph flickered at the edge of his vision. The Terran Coalition seal, Priority Crimson. He hesitated, then accepted. Ambassador Riven, said the calm, strained voice of Secretary Malik. Our sensors have detected an empire-wide broadcast originating from your location. Explain immediately. Kael closed his eyes. I don't think I can, he said. What do you mean you can't? He opened them again to find Nyxara standing inches away, listening not to the words, but to the tremor behind them. Because I've just been nominated as co-sovereign of a blind stellar monarchy. Silence crackled over the channel. That is not humorous, Malik said slowly. I know. The line cut. The resonance spiked again, feeding on the fear pouring through the link. Nyxara lifted her hand, and the calm went dead. You cannot carry your world into the labyrinth, she said gently. It will only confuse the echo. Kael laughed once, sharp and hollow. You say that like I volunteered. She angled her head, veil catching the sanctum's glow. You volunteered the moment you chose to stand instead of flee. The nobles parted as Nyxara led him from the chamber into a corridor that pulsed with low-frequency light. The air grew colder with every step, dense with layered vibrations that made Kael's teeth ache. What exactly is this labyrinth? He asked. It is where my people go to meet themselves, she replied. It will reflect you back at you, stripped of language, stripped of masks. That sounds less like a trial and more like execution. Sometimes they are the same thing. They reached a circular threshold framed by pillars of living crystal. At its center yawned an aperture of pure darkness, not the absence of light, but the absence of sensation, a hole in reality that drank sound and feeling alike. Nyxara stopped at the edge. I cannot enter with you, she said, A sovereign must never influence their own echo. Kael's throat tightened. So I go in alone. If I survive, I become your king. If I don't, I vanish into your history. Yes, you barely know me. I know enough, she replied, and reached out to brush her fingers lightly against his cheek. The resonance flared warmly, like a promise. Then she withdrew her hand. The aperture widened. Kael took one step toward the dark again. Kael crossed the threshold, and the universe went silent. Not quiet, not muted, but absent, as if every sense he possessed had been unplugged at once. The floor did not feel solid beneath his boots, yet he did not fall. He hovered in a formless void, aware only of his own breathing. Too loud, too lonely. Then the echoes began. At first they were faint, like distant heartbeats that were not his own. The darkness thickened, folding inward until shapes emerged, built from pressure rather than light. He recognized the first figure instantly. A younger version of himself in a coalition cadet uniform, shoulders squared with borrowed confidence. You still think you're here to help, the echo said. Kael swallowed. I am. The cadet smiled sadly. You left Hestia, 9 burning because the treaty needed clean hands. The void twisted. The training hall dissolved into the shattered docking rings of the asteroid colony. Smoke bleeding into vacuum, bodies tumbling in slow, silent arcs. Kael's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. That was Command's decision, he whispered. No, the echo replied. It was yours. You chose not to disobey. The scene fractured again, revealing another memory. A hospital ward under artificial sunrise. A woman lying still beneath the lattice of life support filaments. His sister, the one he had promised to return to after his first posting beyond Sol. You were too busy saving worlds, the echo said, so you let me die. Kael dropped to his knees, hands clutching empty air. Stop. The labyrinth did not listen. More figures emerged, each one an echo of his compromises. The trade envoy who had begged him not to sanction her planet. The refugee child whose eyes followed him as he boarded a shuttle bound for safer headlines. You carry us like trophies, they said in overlapping voices. Look how heavy your crown already is. The pressure in the void intensified, squeezing his thoughts until he felt himself folding inward. Somewhere far away, he sensed Nyxara's resonance searching for him, but the labyrinth swallowed it, isolating him inside his own failures. You are not fit to rule, the echoes chorused. He screamed, a raw sound that tore from his throat and vanished without reverberation. No sound returned, no comfort, only the relentless mirror of his past. Then something changed. A new vibration threaded through the dark, faint but unmistakable. Not an echo of his memories, but something else. Curiosity, warmth, a presence that did not accuse. Nyxara. He did not see her. He felt her, like a hand extended across impossible distance. The labyrinth resisted, the echoes surging to drown her out. The cadet stepped forward again, eyes blazing. You will fail her too, it said. You will break her empire the way you broke everything else. Kael forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, but they held. I am not the sum of my worst moments, he said, voice steadying. I am what I do next. The echoes laughed, a brittle, fracturing sound. The void convulsed, compressing around him, trying to crush that fragile declaration. He closed his eyes and chose not to defend himself. Instead of resisting the pressure, he opened to it. He let the guilt wash through him, not as a weapon, but as proof that he still cared. The memories did not vanish. They softened, reshaping into something less jagged. The cadet's expression faltered. The refugee child tilted her head, confusion replacing accusation. I cannot undo what I've done, Kael said quietly, but I can carry it forward and make it matter. The labyrinth hesitated. That was all he needed. He focused on the faint warmth threading through the void, aligning his breathing with it, pulse-matching resonance. He reached outward, not with his hands, but with the part of himself that had learned to endure loss without becoming hollow. The darkness peeled back. Nyxara's presence surged closer, no longer distant, no longer filtered. The void filled with layered harmonics, A symphony of emotions not his own, weaving through his shattered memories, not erasing them, but integrating them. The echoes began to dissolve. One by one, the figures faded, leaving behind not silence, but a steadier vibration, something like acceptance. You are not broken. Nyxara's voice whispered through the resonance. You are unfinished. Light returned, not optical but structural, rebuilding sensation. Kael felt the floor solidify beneath him, felt gravity settle into familiar shape. He stood in the center of the labyrinth's core, a vast chamber of prismatic crystal that pulsed in time with his heart. And above him, the towers sang. Not the song of coronation, the song of convergence. Kael lifted his head, realization dawning. The labyrinth had not rejected him. It had rewritten him. Kael stepped out of the labyrinth a different person, though no mirror could have told him how. The corridor beyond the threshold shimmered with layered resonance, the walls vibrating with a pattern that bent toward him, no longer evaluating, but responding. Nyxara stood waiting exactly where he had left her. She did not move when he emerged. She did not reach for him. Yet the space between them tightened, charged with a familiarity that had not existed before. You returned, she said softly. Kael nodded once. Words felt insufficient, like trying to summarize a lifetime in a breath. It didn't destroy me. It never does, she replied. It only removes what you pretend to be. The high attendant and the assembled nobles watched from a respectful distance. The harmonic signatures rippling through the hall were no longer chaotic. They were synchronized, faintly aligned to Kael's presence, like instruments tuning to a new conductor. A noble with a mantle of refracted light drifted forward. Your radiance, the tower's report full convergence. The human's resonance has bonded with the sovereign field. Kael looked around, unsettled. Bonded how? Nyxara answered before anyone else could. The throne is no longer singular. A wave of murmurs rippled through the court. The high attendant folded its limbs tightly. Your radiance, dual sovereignty, has not occurred since the pre-founding era. The consequences are uncharted. Nyxara finally reached for Kael again, her fingers brushing his knuckles, a touch so light it barely qualified as contact. The entire corridor responded, resonance deepening like a held breath. Everything worth becoming is uncharted, she said. The nobles parted as she led him toward the grand resonance chamber, a cathedral-sized space whose ceiling vanished into shimmering auroras of vibration. At its center rose the throne node, a crystalline structure grown rather than built, pulsing with the emotional history of an empire. Kael felt it before they reached it, a pull, not physical, but relational, like gravity made of memory. What happens if I refuse? He asked quietly. Nyxara slowed. Then the field will tear itself apart trying to reconcile what it has already accepted. That sounds dangerously close to coercion. It is dangerously close to destiny, she replied. They reached the base of the throne node. The air vibrated so intensely that Kael's vision wavered at the edges, reality blurring like heat shimmer over desert glass. A circular dais unfolded from the floor, forming two distinct resonance wells, each pulsing in counterpoint to the other. The high attendant's voice trembled despite itself. Your radiance, if he steps onto the secondary well, the codex will be irrevocably breached. Nyxara did not look back. So will stagnation. She stepped onto the primary well, the one reserved for sovereigns of the Auralith Dominion. The crystal beneath her brightened, harmonics blooming outward in concentric waves. All eyes turned to Kael. He hesitated. His calm implant buzzed weakly, struggling to connect through the dense resonance. Against his better judgment, he accepted. Malik's face flickered into view, pale and strained. Ambassador, our analysts are reading structural shifts in local spacetime. If you do not disengage immediately, we may lose all diplomatic leverage with the Dominion. Kael closed his eyes. He saw the echoes from the labyrinth, the faces of those he had failed, and the quiet warmth of Nyxara's presence threading through his memories like a promise of repair. I don't think this is about leverage anymore, he said. Kael, you are one person, Malik insisted. You cannot shoulder an empire. He opened his eyes and looked at Nyxara. Her veil shimmered, catching the auroral light. She did not plead. She did not command. She waited. "I've been carrying empires my whole life," he replied, and terminated the link. The chamber inhaled as he stepped onto the secondary well. The throne node erupted. Harmonic waves cascaded through the chamber, braiding Nyxara's resonance with his, not erasing their differences, but weaving them into a single, more complex pattern. Kael gasped as the field surged into him, not invasive, but expansive, stretching his awareness outward beyond the confines of his skull. For a terrifying moment, he felt the Dominion, millions of minds, billions of histories, an ocean of emotion crashing through his nervous system. He would have fallen if Nyxara had not reached across the narrowing space and taken his hand. The surge stabilized. The chamber fell silent, stunned. The high attendant dropped to the floor in a posture of absolute submission. One by one, the nobles followed. Nyxara's voice carried through the stillness, layered now with something new. "Behold," she said, "the first resonance-bonded sovereign of two worlds." Kael tightened his grip on her hand, feeling the weight of a galaxy settle around his heart. The first thing Kael noticed after the coronation surge was the silence inside his own head. Not emptiness, but order, like a storm that had reorganized itself into a sky. The throne node dimmed to a steady glow, no longer roaring with convergence, but breathing in synchrony, with two sovereign pulses instead of one. Nyxara released his hand, though the absence of her touch felt louder than any fanfare. The nobles remained prostrate, their harmonic signatures subdued, reverent, afraid to disrupt the new equilibrium they could all feel settling into the bones of the palace. The high attendant rose first, mandibles trembling. "Your radiance, your graces." It corrected itself after a faltering pause. "The Dominion acknowledges the dual throne state. Protocol requires immediate delineation of authority." Kael exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the rhythm of the throne field. "Authority," he echoed. "Right. Let's start by not accidentally collapsing your civilization." A ripple of confused amusement spread through the chamber. Nyxara inclined her head. "He speaks with humor. This is reassuring." They were escorted through layers of living corridors toward the inner archive, a structure older than the star the palace orbited. As they moved, Kael became aware of whispers that were not words, emotional fragments brushing the edges of his awareness. The Dominion was not speaking to him directly. It was adjusting. "Is this permanent?" he asked under his breath. "As permanent as any resonance can be," Nyxara replied, "which is to say, it will endure as long as we continue choosing it." The inner archive opened like a wound in space, a cavern of suspended memory crystals rotating around a gravity-null core. Within, histories were not recorded but felt, each shard humming with the lived experience of those long dead. A tall archivist, its form shifting between solid and luminous states, glided forward. "Your graces," the archive recognizes a novel harmonic signature. "Clarify designation." Nyxara looked to Kael. He hesitated only a heartbeat. "King consort," he said, "but I'd settle for partner." The archivist paused, internal harmonics recalibrating. Designation accepted. A wave of relief rippled through Kael. He had not even realized he was bracing for rejection. "Your people will resist this," he said quietly to Nyxara as they approached the core. "They already are," she replied. "So are yours." As if summoned by her words, Kael's calm implant flared again. He ignored it this time. The Dominion's emotional current was stronger than any data burst, a tide of curiosity, apprehension, and something dangerously close to hope. The archivist extended a filament of light into the core. The dual throne anomaly must be contextualized within precedent. Select which histories to integrate. Nyxara gestured toward Kael. "He will choose." Kael stared at the swirling crystal field. "You want me to rewrite how your people remember themselves?" "I want you to show them how humans survive being changed," she replied. He closed his eyes, letting the throne field guide him. The whispers resolved into patterns, clusters of memory resonating with loss, endurance, defiance. He reached out, not physically, but with intent, selecting shards that pulsed with stories of rebuilding after catastrophe, of coalitions forged between former enemies, of civilizations that had stared into extinction and decided to be more than their fear. The core flared brighter with every choice. "This is reckless," the High Attendant murmured, though it did not intervene. "Everything that lasts is," Kael said, the integration completed with a soundless shockwave that rippled through the archive and beyond, seeding new harmonic threads throughout the Dominion's collective memory. Kael staggered, overwhelmed by the scope of what he had just touched. Nyxara steadied him. "You have altered us," she said. "So have you," he replied. Outside the palace, the resonant towers shifted tone again, broadcasting a cadence that rippled across star systems. It was not coronation this time. It was invitation. Kael felt a distant pressure as the first Terran envoys began registering the anomaly, their minds brushing the edges of the Dominion's field through human instruments too crude to fully comprehend it. "They're coming," he said. "Yes," Nyxara agreed. "And when they arrive, they will not find an empire that feels the way it once did." He looked out through a crystalline viewport at the vast spiral of the Dominion, suddenly aware that every decision he made now would echo across species, across generations. "For what it's worth," he said, "I still don't think I was the right person for this." Nyxara's veil shimmered with quiet amusement. "No one ever is." The first Terran shuttle pierced Dominion space 3 cycles later, its arrival rippling through the resonant towers like a struck bell. Kael felt the intrusion before the palace sensors acknowledged it, a foreign emotional texture pressing into the shared field like static in a symphony. "They are afraid," Nyxara said, standing beside him at the observation arch. "So are we," Kael replied, though he doubted she needed the clarification. The shuttle docked under heavy escort, through the layered transparencies of the palace hull. Kael watched its hull panels retract, revealing diplomats in pressure-adapted attire, faces pale beneath filtered visors. These were people he had briefed with, argued with, trusted with fragments of his former life. Now they were stepping into a world that could feel them thinking. The receiving chamber filled quickly, nobles arranging themselves along harmonic gradients that only Kael and Nyxara could truly perceive. The High Attendant stood rigidly at the dais, mandibles clenched in barely concealed tension. Secretary Malak emerged from the shuttle first. His gaze found Kael instantly, widening with something between relief and disbelief. "Ambassador," he said, voice amplified through the chamber. "Our analysts were not exaggerating." "Welcome to the Dominion," Kael replied. Malak took a step closer, then stopped, visibly steadying himself. "The entire coalition network is reporting anomalous feedback loops. Our people are experiencing emotional bleed-through." Nyxara inclined her head. "You are resonating with us." "That was not part of any treaty," Malak said sharply. "It is part of reality now," Kael replied before she could speak. "You sent me here to negotiate access corridors. I found a civilization that doesn't separate thought from consequence. We don't get to leave unchanged." A murmur swept through the Terran delegation. Kael could feel their skepticism, their fear, the reflexive instinct to categorize the unknown as hostile. Malak lowered his voice. "What exactly have you become?" Kael considered the question carefully. "I am still human. I just happen to share a throne with someone who rules by empathy instead of optics." Nyxara stepped forward then, her presence rippling outward like a tide. The Terran delegates stiffened, not in response to her appearance, but to the way their own emotional states began to surface, reflected back at them without filter. "This is a place of feeling," Nyxara said gently. "You are welcome here, but you cannot hide." One of the younger diplomats flinched, tears welling unbidden in her eyes. "Make it stop," she whispered. Kael moved instinctively to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. The throne field adjusted, dampening the ambient resonance around her. "It's overwhelming at first," he said quietly, "but it isn't trying to hurt you." Malak stared at the interaction, then back at Nyxara. "You've turned him into a conduit." Nyxara nodded. "He is bridge, not weapon." The negotiations began awkwardly, with Terran legal teams attempting to overlay familiar frameworks onto a system that did not recognize secrecy as anything other than distortion. Every evasive answer sent ripples through the chamber, exposing hesitation and half-truths, like hairline fractures in glass. Kael found himself mediating not with words, but with alignment, guiding both sides toward emotional coherence before policy could even be discussed. Hours passed, then days. By the fourth cycle, something subtle had changed. Terran delegates stopped checking their filters. Auralith nobles began to vocalize instead of relying solely on harmonic projection. The two species were not blending, but they were learning the rhythm of each other's breathing. Late in the third negotiation session, Malak approached Kael alone. His usual composure was gone, stripped away by the constant feedback of the Dominion's field. "I don't know how to lead here," he admitted. Kael studied him, seeing not the secretary but the man beneath, exhausted, afraid of making a mistake that could ripple across humanity's future. "You don't lead by control," he said. "You lead by letting them feel you trying." Malak nodded slowly, as if testing the weight of the idea. "You've changed. So has everything else." Outside the palace, trade routes began to reopen not as contracts, but as resonant agreements. Their terms felt rather than signed. For the first time in recorded history, two civilizations were negotiating not from positions of leverage, but vulnerability. That night, standing alone beneath the palace's auroral canopy, Kael felt the Dominion settle into a quieter cadence, less volatile, more curious. Nyxara joined him, close enough that their shared field merged without effort. "You are afraid of what this will cost your people," she said. "I am afraid of what it will reveal," he replied. She rested her forehead lightly against his shoulder. "Then we are aligned." Far beyond the palace, the resonant towers broadcast a new tone into the void. Not conquest, not coronation. Understanding. Weeks passed, and Kael began to understand the weight of shared sovereignty in ways no protocol manual could have prepared him for. Every decision he made reverberated across the Dominion's collective consciousness. Every emotion he allowed himself to feel became visible, tangible to millions of beings who had once measured loyalty by obedience alone. Nyxara had insisted that he remain in the palace during this period, both as co-sovereign and as the human anchor for the throne node. He watched the Empire respond in real time to his choices. An attempted rebellion in the mining sectors was not quelled with soldiers, but with careful modulation of emotional feedback, a demonstration of understanding and fairness that left both sides wary but intact. The Dominion had never experienced leadership like this. Direct, human, flawed, yet undeniably resonant. Kael learned quickly. He memorized the patterns of the nobles, their harmonic signatures, noting which voices would rise in fear, which would rise in hope. He discovered that small gestures, placing a hand on a vibrating crystal console, aligning his heartbeat with a fluctuating resonance, could stabilize entire districts. Empires had always been about control, he realized. Here, control was impossible. Influence, patience, and vulnerability mattered far more. One evening, Nyxara summoned him to the observation arch, where the auroral fields stretched across the palace, sealing like a living galaxy. Kael leaned against the railing, exhausted but alert. "Your people will never fully understand this," he said. "They will understand what matters," Nyxara replied. Her veil shimmered faintly, reflecting the iridescent light. "They will feel it." He looked down at the city beneath the palace, the towers humming in delicate rhythm. "I've been asked to submit quarterly reports, send back trade evaluations, manage diplomatic relations, all while walking this fine line between human instinct and whatever this is." Nyxara placed a hand on his back, guiding him closer to the window. "You have not only survived the trial of echoes," she said. "You have redefined it. You are the first human to share the throne without fracturing its resonance." Kael swallowed, absorbing the weight of her words. "It feels like every day I'm one mistake away from undoing everything." "Perhaps," Nyxara said softly, "but one mistake will not destroy you. That is the difference between fear and understanding." A calm signal flickered faintly in his implant, but he ignored it. Nothing from the Terran coalition could compete with the living pulse of a civilization he now partially embodied. Days later, a delegation from the Helior Rift arrived. Traders, diplomats, and engineers, all skeptical, all tightly wound by the rigid logic of their own networks. Kael felt them immediately. Their expectations, their habitual caution, their subtle attempts to shield themselves from the Dominion's emotional currents. Every layer of it mapped itself onto his chest like a second heartbeat. He guided them through the throne node's resonance fields, translating subtle patterns of the Dominion into terms they could act on, teaching them how to navigate without overwhelming themselves. For the first time in his career, negotiation was not about leverage or deception. It was about shared awareness, a balance of risk and care. By the end of the third day, a breakthrough occurred. The delegation requested to leave part of their cargo and personnel under the Dominion's guidance. They did not demand contracts or guarantees. They requested trust. Kael realized the enormity of the moment. They had moved from fear to curiosity, from suspicion to cooperation. That night, Kael returned to the observation. Nyxara joined him silently, as she often did. For the first time, he felt no need to explain himself. The Dominion, the delegation, even the memories of his failures were all aligned, at least temporarily. "You've changed," she said. "I can feel it in the throne field. The human instinct to survive is strong, but yours has evolved into something different." Kael allowed himself a tired smile. "I suppose that makes me part Auralith now." "Part bridge," Nyxara corrected. "Part resonance." He leaned against the railing, feeling the gentle pulse of the Empire beneath him. The dual sovereignty was no longer theoretical. He could feel it in the subtle harmonics of the throne node, in the way the nobles responded without command, in the faint tremor of the auroras above. Somewhere deep in the palace, the high attendant clicked its mandibles in quiet acknowledgement, as if conceding that what had been unprecedented had now become undeniable. Kael closed his eyes, letting the rhythmic vibrations flow through him. Each beat carried weight, yes, but also potential. Every choice, every reaction, was part of the larger pattern. He was no longer a visitor. He was part of the Empire itself. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to imagine a future that was not dictated by fear, obligation, or protocol, but by understanding, partnership, and resonance. The sun, or what passed for a sun in this sector, rose over the Dominion with a brilliance that made the auroral fields of the palace seem muted by comparison. Kael stood at the highest observation deck, Nyxara at his side, feeling the pulse of the Empire as one entity rather than two separate rulers. Every tower, every resonant node, every citizen's emotional signature wove into a vast, living tapestry of awareness, and he could feel the harmony of it, steady and strong beneath his chest. "This is terrifying," Kael admitted quietly, though the words were unnecessary. The throne field already knew. It had always known. "It is terrifying because it is real," Nyxara said softly. Her veil caught the first rays of the sun, scattering them like crystal dust. "You have learned what it is to be sovereign not by force, but by presence." Kael exhaled slowly, letting the weight of months settle over him. He remembered the first day, the first touch, the first trial of echoes, and how far he had come. He had entered this empire as a diplomat, an observer, a mere human with formal training and cautious instincts. Now he was part of the throne node itself, co-sovereign, a bridge between species, a living testament to the value of humanity in a galaxy that often overlooked it. The distant hum of the resonant towers intensified. Kael looked toward the city below, noting how trade routes were now flowing without conflict, how disputes were resolved through dialogue guided by emotional clarity rather than legal manipulation. Terran envoys walked freely alongside Auralith nobles, their interactions no longer tentative or fearful, but deliberate, trusting, and remarkably joyful. A soft ripple in the throne field drew Kael's attention. A diplomatic envoy had just concluded a private session with the inner circle of Auralith leaders. He could feel their relief and admiration. They had not expected a human to navigate their emotional network so deftly. Yet Kael had not merely survived. He had inspired. Nyxara touched his shoulder lightly. "You understand now," she said. "Authority is not control. It is resonance. It is influence through presence, not imposition." Kael nodded, allowing himself a rare, private smile. "I spent my life thinking leadership was about power. Here it's about feeling. I never imagined it could feel right." "Then you have learned faster than any human before you." Nyxara said. She reached out, brushing her hand along his, and he felt the subtle reinforcement of their dual sovereignty. The throne node's energy knitting their pulses together, weaving trust, understanding, and empathy into a single rhythm. Below the observation deck, the city's auroral canals reflected the light of the twin moons. Ships glided through them, human and Auralith crews working side by side, synchronizing movements, learning from one another. Kael could feel their excitement and trepidation, their hope and relief. Humanity's first foray into this empire was no longer dictated by fear, contracts, or misunderstanding. It was being guided by mutual recognition and shared curiosity, a breakthrough unprecedented in both civilizations' histories. A distant chime signaled a formal assembly in the throne hall. Nyxara and Kael descended together, their steps measured and assured. The nobles had arranged themselves in an unprecedented configuration, their harmonic signatures bending toward Kael in subtle acknowledgement. The high attendant hovered nearby, a rare expression of cautious respect on its mandibles. As Kael stepped forward, the throne node pulsed, harmonizing with his presence. The assembly fell silent, the room vibrating with anticipation and recognition. Every being present could feel the stability, the balance, and the resonance that Kael now represented. He raised his hand briefly, a small gesture that communicated both greeting and assurance. Nyxara spoke next, her voice amplified not by sound but by resonance. The human ambassador who entered our empire has demonstrated courage, empathy, and understanding beyond a species' expectations. He is no longer an observer, but a participant, a co-sovereign, a bridge to our future together. A low, collective murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. Kael felt it in his chest, a symphony of acceptance, trust, and awe. He turned to Nyxara, their hands meeting once again. "We've done it," he said softly. "Not just survived, but changed the course of history." Nyxara tilted her head, faintly amused. "History has a new rhythm now, and it hums with both of us." For the first time, Kael allowed himself to see what this truly meant. Humanity was no longer a distant observer. They had a place in this empire, not because of conquest or fear, but because of resonance, connection, and courage. He understood now that the Dominion would carry his influence forward for generations, and that together, he and Nyxara had created a foundation stronger than any legal treaty, stronger than any weapon. As the assembly concluded, Kael turned to the audience beyond the palace, their curious eyes waiting across the galaxy. He raised his hand once more. "We invite all who wish to see what is possible when understanding leads, not fear, to join us." The towers flared in response, their signals broadcasting a new cadence of hope, collaboration, and resonance across star systems. A new era had begun, not one ruled by dominance, but by empathy, cooperation, and the undeniable presence of humanity. Nyxara's hand closed over his. "The galaxy is listening," she whispered. Kael nodded, feeling the weight of every life, every choice, every heartbeat that had brought him here. Together, they stood at the heart of an empire, not as conqueror and subject, but as sovereigns and partners, ready to face the universe as one. And for the first time, Kael allowed himself to hope, not for himself, not for glory, but for a future where humanity could be more than observers. They could be participants, resonating in harmony with the stars. The dual throne pulsed once, steady, unwavering, a signal to the galaxy that the age of fear had ended and a new era of understanding had begun. If you enjoyed witnessing this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to HFY Scape, so you never miss another story where humanity proves its strength in ways the stars themselves can feel.